This is Crossing Faiths, the first podcast featuring a Muslim and a Christian talking religion and politics. My name is Matt Hawkins. I'm a former policy director for the Southern Baptist Convention, soon, maybe, to be the Great Commission Baptist Convention. We'll see about that in the coming year. And my friend, John Pinna, who is founder and executive director of Muslims for Muslims. As always, we're available wherever you listen to podcasts, and we're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and everything else is at crossingfades.com. John Pinna, you look cuddly and all bundled up this morning. What's going on in upstate?
It's really cold here. It's just really cold. I don't know what else to say. The leaves are still in the trees. Beautiful. People come from all over the world for that, to the Hudson Valley for the changing of the leaves. So but right. That hasn't happened yet. Everything's still green, but it's a little cold. It's a little cold. Yep. And I'm trying to power through my walks in the morning, and everybody's kind of looking at everybody going, it's too early to be cold. So yeah, I'm powering through, but I'm wearing a really warm sweater but it's a particular type of sweater because our guest is from Ireland. So I'm wearing an Aran. So and I think Aran just means made out of wool by some dude. I don't know. We'll have to ask our guest. So we're lucky today to have Suzanne Selvester, who is a motivational speaker and author and newly television TV show host. Her book is coming out this fall. It's called Champagne and Self-Loathing, and you'll see her on a new television series in the UK on Sky TV. Although I'm not going to mention the name because we want it to pop as a big surprise. But Suzanne and I are old friends now, friends and acquaintances. We were planning on working together on an event that His Holiness the Dalai Lama works very close with me. The Government in Exile, the Kampa people were clients of mine, and we were going to have His Holiness. He had done a series of events here in the United States, and then he was going to come back to the United States and then come to London. And he, because of his age, stopped traveling. So we had never we were collaborating on the event, and then he chose to stop traveling within that time span because of his health. And but we've always kept in touch, and we have a very unique opportunity to explore Suzanne with her faith journey. So welcome, Suzanne.
Hi, John. Thanks. Nice to be here. How are you?
I'm all right. You doing okay?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm here in London, and it's absolutely roasting. It's 26 degrees Celsius. So we're having the opposite effect to you at the moment.
Yeah, we're shivering. What's it like in Tennessee over there? Is it warm?
Yeah, we're about 5 days into cooling temperatures, which is pretty glorious. So we've dropped out of the 80s, and the highs are now in the 70s, and the mornings are in the 50s. So everybody who likes the fall weather, everybody's pretty excited. And of course, now the pumpkin spice takeover is unavoidable. But we get to this is kind of the breakout of the pullover weather here, and I'm glad because the Tennessee humidity is finally broken, which means I can do some reading and studying outside, which a couple weeks ago was pretty unbearable. So that's what life is like down here. We're enjoying it a lot and waiting for the leaves to change. My 4-year-old daughter was all excited this morning because she knew today was the first day of fall when she woke up. Then she was asking if the leaves were changing, and we had to explain kind of, well, not yet. They're gonna change. This is the season that they change, but they don't all change immediately. So she's excited to do that. Suzanne, thank you. Also, welcome to Crossing Phase. Thank you for doing this podcast from across the pond and coming to us from London. We appreciate your time. Give us a little bit of a backstory. Tell us about where you grew up and what life was like for you in Ireland.
Well, Matt, I guess, I was born in the 70s in Dublin, and I grew up. We had a very kind of Catholic upbringing, Irish Catholic. The church was a huge part of our lives. We were schooled by nuns. The boys were schooled by the Christian Brothers. It was very much church on Sundays, confession on Saturdays. You know, that was something that was just part of our lives growing up. You know, the convent schools are everywhere. You know, I think it's a little different now. It's not as kind of, we had a very rigid Catholic upbringing. You know, it was very kind of faith driven. We had to go to Mass on Sunday because we were questioned on Monday by the nuns what the gospel was, and God help us if we didn't know. It was kind of, we'd no option. I'm not sure how things are now. I mean, I moved to the UK nearly 30 years ago, but all my family are still in Dublin, so I do go back there quite a bit, you know.
Yeah.
How did that faith upbringing? It's in on the construct of the environment around you. So you we're in the middle of the Irish sorrow. Is that right? Right. So like it's the Protestants and the Catholics were.
Well, that was very much, you know, part of our lives growing up, because again, you know, back in that time, they call it the Troubles. It was a time of the Troubles. So there was a huge divide between the Catholics and Protestants. I grew up in Dublin, so not as embroiled in it as someone perhaps who grew up in Belfast or Derry, where there was huge, you know, this is where the IRA were, and where, you know, you had one side of the street would be Catholic, one side would be Protestant, you wouldn't cross. You know, now it's not much, it's not like that anymore. You know, we're in times of peace, and you know, Catholic neighbors welcome Protestant neighbors. Where I grew up, particularly, there was one Protestant who we all knew about, because it was such a shocking thing that there was a Protestant person on our road, because we were Catholic, right? There was one house where there was a Protestant, and it was like, wow, there's a Protestant. We were like, wow, there's a Protestant living in there. You know, that's how it was. But like I said, not so much anymore. I think, you know, we're in times of peace. So, you know, there's still very much a Catholic faith in Ireland, but the churches are not seeing the turnout. People are, you know, questioning. For me, certainly, I grew up wanting more. I was curious about other, not so much other faiths, but just other belief systems, perhaps. And I was looking for something in my life, and I think that's what instigated my spiritual journey, and how I ended up on a path of considering other belief systems. You know, as you said earlier on when we were talking, I am historically Catholic. I was born, but now I would probably consider myself multi-faith. And the reason I say that is because, for me, I've read so much about other religions or other ideologies or belief systems. And at one point I studied Kabbalah for about 2 years here at the London Centre. And that was a whole new world for me. That was completely, very closely related to Judaism. It was just very, very different, a time of amazing clarity in my life, you know. So yeah, I find it really interesting, because Buddhism was another thing I considered, and I love a lot of the teachings of the Buddha. And, you know, here on my, you know, sitting here on my desk is a Quran, you know, so I met a lady on an aeroplane coming back from Belfast, would you believe, and we were chatting, and she asked my address, and she sent me this beautiful Quran in the post. She was a Muslim lady, and we're talking about and that got me onto the similarities. We're talking about the similarities between Christianity, Buddhism, Kabbalah, Muslim. You know, we were talking about all of these things, and she said, what you're talking about sounds like what we read in the Quran. And that was the similarities of our faith. And I sometimes think we focus a little bit too much on the differences. And I like to think the similarities, what are they? Compassion, empathy, kindness, love, humility, grace, all of those beautiful emotions that we all share throughout, across the board. And that was one thing that I really kind of was really struck with me when I was studying all these different things. It's almost like the same message packaged differently. And that's the way I like to think about it anyway.
And one of the reasons why Matthew and I asked you onto the podcast is because, you know, you are consider yourself multi-faith. So it's not anchored in one specific tradition. And you're talking about this journey, and you have this book coming out, you know, Champagne and Self-Loathing. What's the why? You know, so the moving away from from your grown up tradition
Yeah.
to where you are now. I think we had a conversation about this where I was talking about, well, if I decided to jump to become a Baptist, I'd still be a cultural Muslim, right? If you jumped into Islam, you'd still be a culturally Catholic. I mean, Irish, it's not money the why, but so what's the why, and maybe help with why you started moving from where you were to where you are now, and what made you investigate other multiple faiths as opposed to just one. And I know you like the DL, I know you like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, so how come you're not wearing orange? And
I think it's interesting, for me, certainly, the why was because I reached a point in my life about 10 years ago where I was married to my ex-husband. We're now divorced, great friends. I had deep unhappiness in me. I couldn't identify what this happened, and I could not find comfort anywhere. There was no comfort. I felt like the walls were closing in me, and that instigated, I guess, a spiritual journey for me, which started off with my own self-awareness, because I had to become self-aware. I had to think, I had to learn to observe myself, my actual beliefs. I got lost along the way. I've been told, raised as a Catholic, so I was told as a Catholic, I kind of lost my identity. And about 10 years ago, I set out on a journey to find it. That took me across, as I said, Kabbalah and Buddhism, and in Hinduism, I read and regularly read the Bhagavad Gita, and which I love, and I don't know if I say that right. Actually, I can never actually say that right. But so all of these things were kind of like teaching me to find something within me that had been missing from my life, and that was inner peace. And I guess for me, the belief in kind of who I am and my own kind of learning to be present and learning to live in kind of peace and harmony and happiness and kindness and all of those things without trying to judge other people. It's basically what all of the religion that I was grown up with. I live that way now, but I had to come out of it to kind of come back in. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Yeah, I had to learn it for myself, my own way. I went to school, in Catholic school, at the priest's church. I never took any of that in. I wasn't interested. I was a kid who had to go to school. So we literally nip in for the gospel and nip back out to the bottom of the church. So we knew for Monday what gospel was read. And then we kind of hang out at the end of the church with our friends, right? So that was how we did it. So actually going on the spiritual journey enabled me to find my faith within me. And that was ultimately love.
Suzanne, do you feel like it was like the process and the methods of the church experience that kind of turned you off or troubled you? I'm always interested. So as a Christian believer, I'm always curious, and I think it's good for Christians to hear why some people leave the faith either as a teenager or a young adult, whether they come back or not. I think it's always insightful for us to listen to others, and I've heard a number of others stories of why they found themselves leaving a Christian faith. Was it something in the teachings, or was it more like the process and method?
Definitely, Matt, it would definitely, again, like I said, this is back in the 70s, right? Catholicism for us, the experience of being a Catholic wasn't a loving, nurturing experience ever. We were beaten by the nuns. We were, they would have bamboo canes. This is not a word of a lie. They would have bamboo canes, and we would be sent to, I remember Sister Laurentia, I remember her well, standing in front of her with your hands out, and we would get 10 lashes of the cane, right? And then my brother, who was schooled by the Christian Brothers, they got a cricket bat or a fist or a belt, and that was accepted. I don't remember loving, caring nuns, and I'm sure there are today, but back when I was growing up in Catholic Ireland, we were raised on a steady diet of fear, and it was fear of God and fear of the devil and fear of ourselves, fear of our desires, and on top of fear was shame. Shame was something that was really, if we did well in school, if we did well in school, we were, wonderful. If we didn't, we should be ashamed of ourselves. We should be ashamed of our bodies, ashamed of our desires. So it's a really interesting question, Matt. Nobody's ever actually asked me that until now. Why did I move away from it? I guess because I had to try and live my life without fear, because when you are raised in an environment of fear, it has a huge impact on your life, right? Even up to 10 years ago, which would have seen me in my mid 30s, 10 years ago, I was still driven by fear. My life it's kind of ingrained in your DNA. So for me, Catholicism wasn't a happy experience. And, don't get me wrong, there's some beautiful, the priest that married us became a good friend of ours later on. When I met him later on in life, so the people I met later in life who were Christians and Catholics, I got on great with, but at that time, it wasn't a great experience.
No, well, I thank you for sharing that. I think regardless of what religious tradition we grow up in, those experiences are really formative early on, and they can, in time, if done poorly. And speaking as a Protestant Christian, Protestants have those kinds of issues as well. Maybe not the particular issues, but we can err also. And trying to be too heavy-handed with a kind of what American Christians might call a legalism, among other things. But certainly I think we need to be, this is, your story and your life is kind of an example of how the church can err. And I'm sure speaking as the Christian on the call here, and no Catholic friends here, I don't think we're needlessly picking on the Catholic Church, but you've had that was your particular experience. I've heard similar experiences in Protestant traditions, and so I think it's good for us to always reflect on how our methods of our faith are shaping our children, and shaping
Absolutely.
those of
And the
us.
teaching of it, right? The
Yeah.
delivery of it. And, the Catholic Church has had a lot of bad press over the years. Let's be honest here. There's been huge corruption and cover up and sexual abuse and all of that's kind of been discussed. And we've seen it everywhere, in America and Ireland and all sorts of things being back in those days, everything was considered to be proper. Regardless of whether it was right or wrong, it was, it had to be, the approval of the priest or approval of the nuns. There was no happiness didn't come into it. Those children they found, in one, I think, I can't remember what it was. They would take the children from the young mothers because they were married, they were out of wedlock and so on. All really bad press the Catholic Church has had. I believe now in Dublin, certainly with my sister and my brother's children, it's less kind of dogmatic, less strict.
Yeah.
They're having a more spiritual approach, trying to teach children to be more, I don't know, I think more aware of themselves as well, and just delivering it better, I think,
Yeah.
I mean,
thanks for sharing that.
My tradition. Yeah. No, sorry, I was saying my tradition's no exception. It's everything's in the news. It's my tradition, right? So, I would tell the story. They got a previous podcast. I was down in Kandahar, and I come out from the mosque, and this guy starts hitting me with a cane. I can't remember what it's called in Dari, but he keeps hitting me with the cane. Says I'm praying wrong, and I grabbed it from him, and we get to this melee, and before you know it, it's the Taliban, right? And I'm like, and my friends are trying to arbitrate. We're talking back and forth, and I go, well, how do I know he knows how to pray right? He's telling me I'm praying wrong. How do I know he's even Muslim?
Yeah.
And it was an interesting moment because he actually he held hands and went back in, and we slotted out, prayed together, and came out, and we kind of diffused the whole situation, and then had kebab afterwards. But all of our traditions have that. They have some rigidness to it. And then it's in our community, it's promoted, right? Because of all the stuff that's going on with the war on terror and so forth. What I'm curious is, how did you get away from that fear? So how did you get away from that guilt? What was the journey? Because I've gone further in, right, into my tradition. And I'm, like I said, I'm in this Smiley, we're I always describe us as Islam after hours. We're more of an esoteric art. So, and and so, and I'm sure we've all experienced this, I even, Matthew with his tradition. I mean, I was at a Pentecostal,
Pentecostal.
and he was like,
Pentecostal.
there were children under the pews. Like there's like, because there was fire and brimstone. I got scared. I'm like, is it happening today, right now? So I was like, I was kind of, it was funny. I was reaching out because I go, if the rapture happens right now, I'm holding on to these two people and I'm going way up. So I don't know if it works that way, but I think it does. So how did you get away from the fear? How did you get away from this? What was the journey with those anchor points of fear and guilt? And because we all feel these things, particularly in our different traditions. We don't pray enough. We don't do this enough. We don't, even though our traditions are anchored in, acts of goodness and trying to be espouse the wondrous components of our faith traditions, which have a lot of similarities. But for in your particular journey, how did that evolve, and how did you unpack maybe one or two of these things? I don't know if it's big, but
you know what, John, it's a bit of a loaded question. How did I get away from the fear and away from the guilt? It was not easy, and it all came down once again to my self-awareness, because the journey for me had to be a journey within, and I had to find out who I was and what I, first and foremost, what I actually believed. Because I didn't know, I was raised a Catholic. We were told, you're born, you're Catholic, there you go, you're labeled straight away, right? I got christened, I made my first Holy Communion, I grew up, I'm Catholic, my Catholic beliefs. And then I got busy with my life, right? So my faith wasn't really part of my 20s and 30s. I was too busy partying, right? And then I got married, and then I had my children. And then when I reached this point in my mid-30s where I suddenly didn't know who I was. I didn't know who I was, and I realized I didn't know what love was in my life. They were the most devastating realizations I'd ever had to that point. And that was when I started to think, well, I need some help, right? Going to church and sitting there, yes, I love churches. Even when I wasn't particularly, kind of practicing Catholic, I've always loved the church. I love sitting in the church and just seeing the beauty and so on. But that point where I had to learn to overcome my fear was going on a journey that took me 10 years. I can honestly say now I live without fear, but that fear was deeply ingrained into who I was from my upbringing. And I used to think it was guilt. You said the word guilt, but it wasn't guilt. It was actually shame, which is much more destructive. It's much, because the guilt is you can feel guilty for something, but with shame is you believe there's something wrong with you, right? So if you do something wrong, you can feel guilty about it, but with shame goes much deeper than that. And we were raised on shame, and to try and actually, when you're raised on a diet of shame, what happens is you become somebody who feels they're unworthy of love, or they're unworthy of happiness, because that's what happened to me. Because when I start going deep on my journey, I realized that I had I created an illusion of my life to convince myself that I was happy. And that illusion entailed a husband and 3 children, and everything was great and life was amazing. And then I realized, actually, well, where's the happiness that comes with this? And then the journey involved. And one of the big turning points on my spiritual journey was my time at the London Kabbalah Center, because that enabled me amazing clarity. Because with the teaching of Kabbalah is about the light of the Creator, okay? And you allow the light of the Creator with the intention of sharing it to somebody else. It's about resisting. It's about resisting immediate pleasure and going for the long term. It's about responding to life instead of reacting it. And that gave me, it just gave me a bit of peace and a bit of clarity. And then after Kabbalah, I was able to kind of think, well, okay, I like Buddhism. So I read a lot about Buddhism. And then I thought, well, I like Hinduism. And I like, I met this lady on the plane who gave me this beautiful Quran that I often look through. And, to me, it just felt like, well, which one is it? I haven't come up with the answer. At the moment, I feel very fulfilled, very happy. I meditate regularly. I believe absolutely in God. I believe God is within me. I pray to God. I refer to God. I love Jesus quotes. I read about Jesus. I think he was an amazing man, and I love kind of the wisdom that he had. I just don't feel like I particularly need a belief system in my life right now. Maybe that will change. Maybe I will turn to something. But right now, I believe everything that I have is within me, and I believe God is within me. You know, and sometimes we have quite a big Jehovah's Witness community where I live here, and they often come knocking at the door because they're always trying to recruit you into their flock and so on. And you know, I often invite them in. I love having conversations like this, right? And I find particularly, I don't know if I should say that, but I find them particularly fear driven. You know, they're fear, something about the 228 are going to be saved at the rapture or something like that. And the times that they've come back with reinforcements. You know, they come, I chat about my belief and being very happy and I'm okay where I am. They come back with somebody higher, and then they come back with somebody higher. And then the fourth time they come back with like a bishop to try and recruit me. And I was like, you know, but she said, don't you fear dying? I said, I don't fear dying because I can't die. I'm eternal. I'm you know, everything I have. So it's kind of like, for me, I feel at peace, and I don't know if I need anything else right now.
So for the sake of folks who are unfamiliar, and I want to take advantage of you being our first guest who's particularly familiar with Kabbalah, give us a little more detail about Kabbalah and maybe what sets it apart from most of the Jewish practice.
I guess it's more of a belief system. I don't think it's classed as a religion. It's a belief system, and they believe in the 1%, which is the physical universe, which is where we are now, and then the rest of it is the 99%. And Kabbalah teaches you that anything in the physical universe is temporary. Everything in the physical universe is temporary. We're temporary. Our bodies are temporary, but our souls are everlasting, you know, eternal. We can never die. We're built from the same things as the stars, right? The way Kabbalah teaches is that everything you can't see, the things you can't see, are the most valuable things in life. That is happiness, love, compassion, empathy, kindness, all of the things that we talked about earlier on, you know, integrity, grace, all of those things. They teach you that they're the best things in life, or the best things that you can't actually hold in your hand, right? They also teach you that the light of the Creator is to be shared. The only reason we're here is to make a better life for other people, for the world, for our children, our grandchildren, whatever. Everything that we receive is to be shared. I found amazing clarity. I remember having a one-to-one session with my Kabbalah instructor, and at the time I was still living my life under the idea of blame. I was blaming everything that was going on to me was somebody else's fault, right? And at that time, a lot of my blame was on my father. I grew up believing that I suffered with emotional deprivation from my father because he never told me he loved me enough. So I carried this like a badge. I wore this like a badge for years, right? And I grew up with this kind of feeling of deprivation. And I remember having this breakthrough with my Kabbalah teacher. We had this one-to-one meeting every month. And she said to me, Suzanne, do you think your father deliberately withheld his love from you? And it was just one of those moments where it was like, boom. Because of course, my father deliberately didn't withhold his love from me. My father was doing all he was capable of doing. And he was every bit a product of his childhood as I was of mine. And it was kind of like this realization that, wow, because they teach you at Kabbalah, one of the biggest things is personal responsibility. You are absolutely responsible for everything that occurs in your life, good and bad, you invite it into your life, right? And I went home a couple of months later, and you know, she had said to me initially before this, she said, I think you should ask your father for forgiveness for not being the daughter that you should have been. And I looked and I thought, what? Me ask forgiveness of my father? Surely it's the other way around. I should be forgiving him. But this is when she pointed out to me that he deliberately withhold his love. And I remember going to Dublin a couple of months later, and I said to my father, I said, Dad, I'd just like to say, like to ask your forgiveness for not being, I mean, he thought I was crazy, and my mother honestly thought I had joined a cult, because they're Catholics, right? So they were kind of, I'm going home saying this Kabbalah teaching, and I said, can I ask your forgiveness? And he did, and we laughed about it, and he forgave me and I forgave him. And our relationship wasn't magically transformed, but it was lighter. Now I have a wonderful relationship with my father because I no longer blame him for my emotional deprivation. The emotional deprivation was in me. It was nothing to do with him. And when I changed how I felt about that, I felt better for it.
Interesting. I think we all have, these journeys with our parents. My mother and father, I'm always saying, I'm always thanking them for how they raised me and I know they did the best they could, but they're products, they're products of their environment, and stuck in, my mother is stuck in the 50s, like that's her mindset.
That's not a bad place to be stuck in, JT,
Yeah,
right?
I know. Well, I think it's great. It's all, these wonderful colors and great, the music was very predictable. Everything's wonderful. And my mother just wants that, her favorite phrases is suppress and pretend. That's one of her favorite phrases.
No, absolutely. Well, I mean, my father was I think he was one of 12 children, 6 boys and 6 girls. His father died when he was 2 years old, leaving his mother with 12 children on her own. He didn't grow up with parental skills. He didn't grow up with parental skills. He was just doing his best. And now when I stop judging him and just let it be, I have a great relationship with my dad because he is what he is, right? And that's just the end of it. So it's a nice place to be, with him.
Yeah, it's a good spot. I mean, getting the first to get their educations, the first to break out from poverty, the first, all these different things. And they did such a good job with what they had, and the best job they could. So it sounds like I'm plugging them, but it comes with a little bit of a journey, and so, but my mother she's just very cute about it. She comes, our tradition is suppress and pretend, everything's okay. It's the niceties and the cordialities, she's, if you don't like me, you can pretend, and that's good enough.
See, that's exactly it, isn't it? And I think that's what happened to me because that was my kind of saying in life up to about 35, suppress and pretend, because that was and when you suppress your emotions and you keep suppressing them, when they go, wow, you better look out, because for me, it was like a nuclear fallout when I'm actually connected with my emotions and began to let the person I truly am emerge instead of the suppressed version of me. Everything in my life changed. Some of my friends are no longer my friends. Everything was different. I just had to allow myself to be the true, authentic version of me, to speak my truth with love, to speak my truth with love, to speak that's how my philosophy is, to try and be as least judgmental and just live my life with love. It's hard sometimes, but
I'm the complete opposite. See, I judge. I'm a New Yorker, so I know who I am, what I'm about. I judge, and I mean, I'll still help, but I'm gonna be like, you want to know what? I'm the guy who's gonna say, "I told you so." So I'm a completely on the other. We need to do a TED talk about how you're like, I don't judge. This is what's going on, and then it's like, no, I think that you need.
I didn't say I don't judge. I try not to judge. That can
John just jumps in with both feet.
And then we got Matthew here. Matthew's, I think one of the real amazing moments in my experience is Matthew and my collaboration. We come from such different traditions, right? We had one of our listeners say, 2 guys trying to act nice to each other, but they both think each other's going to hell. That was one of the comments, but they secretly are hoping the other one goes to hell. And it was funny because we were reflecting on that, and I go, I don't know if I've ever thought that about it, really about anybody, but let alone Matthew. I like to think that, he's going to up his conversion game and start sending me gifts, Christmas, right. So, and inviting me out to dinners. But it's difficult because it's amazing you're talking about your journey, because I think we all have our personal stories and with our families, and we come from that. And Matthew and I wrestled with faith in our first interactions, and where's the line of scrimmage, and where's our line of retreat with each other, that has led us to this amazing relationship. I don't know if I've forgiven him for anything, and I don't know if he's forgiven me for anything, but and maybe he converted me in absentia, which is fine, you know. But the fact is that we've had a very interesting interaction, very similar to this journey and in with you that you've had with your family, where we're trying to not get into the negative aspects, and we not that we don't deal with them, because we do, but to talk about the similarities, and then really work with each other on listening and building on what we have, you know, and not getting away from getting caught in the minutiae of things, and taking responsibility for our tribes. I mean, that's part of the reason why we're in this podcast, is taking responsibility for ourselves and our tribes and where we're going. And that seems like it might be a little bit of hubris to say that, but the dialogue that we have is a product of that commitment to each other, like your commitment to yourself and your family. You know, you can't get rid of your father, right? He's you only have one of them, and you want to have that powerful relationship. And Matthew and I have been working on that so tremendously. Here's a question for you. So you have this journey. You're on this journey. You've got this. You're doing your public speaking, and you've got your book coming out. What's the anchor points of this book? If you're gonna, it talks about all these different components in your life journey, but knowing yourself is one of them. I think you have this philosophy of. And I'd like for you to unpack it about surrender, right? Yeah. And so I find that very particularly interesting from an Islamic perspective, because the idea of surrendering, submission is how you get to know yourself in Islam, right? So you and I'm sure this lady who gave you the Quran said, "Oh yeah, you got it. You're Muslim, you know, inherently, right?" So it'd be very interesting for members of my tribe to speak about that, for you to speak about that from a non-Islamic perspective, right? So you came there on your own accord. So kind of interested in you unpacking that a little bit.
So for me, surrender was one of, you know, you were looking at the ultimate emotional control freak, right? In my life. Now, the interesting thing about that was I had, until about 2 years ago, I didn't know I was an emotional control freak. I didn't know what an emotional control freak was, right? And on top of that, I was an emotional perfectionist, but I'll get to that in a second. What happened was I was having a conversation with a very spiritual woman, and she said she felt it was my job to heal my family. Because we'd still a bit, this a couple of years ago, still a bit of conflict. I've been going through a lot of heartache, and I felt like my family weren't there. My family are very emotionally void. They don't do the I love you. They don't do the, you know, when I hug my mother, it's all a bit awkward. And, you know, that generation.
But that's Brits. Come on, let's just be honest. Right? You know, you guys don't know how to shake hands.
Yeah, we're not Americans. It's all a bit more proper. But, right. So I remember having that conversation, and I was saying, look, you know, I love my family, but I've accepted, I've surrendered the fact that they're just not interested in my spiritual journey, because I had been sending them books and I couldn't help, particularly when I was learning about the universe and all of this. I tried not to preach, but I couldn't help myself. I was like, oh, you've got to read this, and you've got to do that, you've got to do this.
Speaking Matthew's language now, preach, you're doing it.
But anyway, she said to me, well, I said, I've given up. She said, well, it doesn't sound like you were trying to help them. It sounds like you were trying to control them, because you're a control freak. And I was like, what? Me, the control freak? Hang on, I am a fly by the seat of my pants kind of gal. I would love to be a control freak. This is what I was thinking. I'm disorganized chaos at the best of time, constantly chasing my tail. And she said, no, not that kind of control freak. She said, you're an emotional control freak. At the time, I didn't know what she meant, but I absolutely knew that I was an emotional control freak. And that is somebody who tries to control the outcome of what's happening, particularly how people thought of me, what I was going to say. I could wake up with anxiety so bad that for worrying about had I said the right thing, or if somebody, this is, you know, 10 years ago, when I was kind of like in my stage of, I call it my chaos. But so the idea of surrender to me was incredible. What is surrender? People think when you say surrender, it means letting go. It's actually not. It's letting go of what you can't control. It's full of acceptance of the situation in your life where you are at that particular time. Because when you surrender, you have a better platform. It doesn't mean you give up. You just accept fully the situation, and then you make a decision on how you change it, if you need to change it, if you want to change it. And you know, Eckhart Tolle, I don't know if you ever heard of Eckhart Tolle. He wrote a book called The Power of Now. Very spiritual man, big kind of guru. I think he's German, but he lives in America. And he has a huge following. And I went to Norway a couple of years ago and spent a weekend on a retreat there with him. And he has a huge, his main philosophy is surrender. He said, when you can surrender to what is and stop resisting it and stop fighting it, you save yourself a lot of suffering by being able to do that, because it is what it is, right? So you can kind of accept it or you can resist it. But either way, that's not going to change. The situation is what it is. And that for me was another huge turning point in my life, you know, to actually be able to surrender. Now, if things happen, okay, I don't want it to happen, but it's happening, so I surrender. And something happens. When you surrender, something happens. The energy shifts. You're in a better place because when you're coming from a place of victimhood, I don't want this to be happening. Why is this happening to me? This shouldn't be happening to me. You're not going to get anywhere. But when you surrender and say, okay, this is happening to me. I don't want it to be happening, but it is. Okay, fully accept that. Breathe it in. Sit with it. You have a better place to come up with a solution. That's what I've found. That works for me. And that's why I surrender to most things in my life.
Oh, Suzanne, I want to thank you for being so candid and open with your spiritual journey, and from your the early years and into exploring other faiths. I think it paints a picture for my fellow Christians who are listening, kind of an example of another human being who longs after the same kinds of things that we long for, things like forgiveness and contentment and salvation and redemption. And of course, the Christian, or if particularly given all the historic baggage with Catholicism and errant and problematic expressions of Protestant Christianity, we could say followers of Jesus. We desire all those things also, and then our particular answer for all those things is that the object for our surrender matters. The object, or the object of our hope for forgiveness and redemption and healing and emotional affirmation, all those things that we feel and desire in very real ways, is Jesus. Because why? Is he just some guy? Well, we believe he's God incarnate, and so that you have a creator being who cares enough to love us, to actually come down and dwell among us and live the kind of life that we live, and so we have hope in the person of Jesus Christ. And I think it's helpful for us to interact with someone who has gone on a faith journey like you and continues to do so. And I'm grateful that you've shared those kinds of things, because these kind of things can be pretty personal, and I think
Matt,
it's helpful for us, kind of in a multi-faith conversation, to respect one another and talk about these things.
Yeah, and that's why I wrote this book, Champagne and Self-Loathing, because it's very raw. It's very I don't hold back. I'm 100% comfortable with who I am, and I share that. You know, the bad stuff and the good stuff, because I feel like there's a lesson. You know, I went on the biggest journey of my life, and I turned my life upside down. You know, I ended up divorced from my husband. He's now a very good friend. I have 3 sons. The terror that I experienced in that time of my life, because I had a false sense of security, and I needed that. I clung to that. So to actually change my life and go on this journey and know who I am, is about self-love for me. And for me, all religion, you know, whether it's Catholic or Muslim or Hindu or whatever it is, it has to be about love. And I think when, you know, we talked about the commonalities, you know, earlier on, love and forgiveness to me is the magic word, right? Forgiveness, forgiving yourself first, and then forgiving, others, because why hang on to that? The Buddha says hanging on to hate or anger is like holding a hot coal and aiming it at somebody else. The person that it hurts the most is you. So for me, I don't live in an ideal world. I have challenges and so on, but ultimately I try to live in love. And that is with whether you're Catholic or Muslim, or I don't see it. I don't see the faith. I just see the person, see the soul, see the belief system, the commonality, and that ultimately love, kindness, forgiveness, and all of those beautiful things that I constantly remind myself of.
Oh, I mean, this is why this conversation is very meaningful for us, is that as operators in the multi-faith space, and we talk a lot about politics, and we talk a lot about faith traditions, and majored in all these religions, and are faithful in our own way. Your participation and time to go over these your belief system, your journey, and who you are and how you got there means the world to us. And it also demonstrates the idea of expression, and anchored in your journey, and your journey is just as valid as anyone else's, and that message is meaningful to Crossing Faiths, to Matthew and I, and we appreciate you taking the time today, and it means a lot to have you on.
Oh, it's been absolutely my pleasure. Listen, I love talking about stuff like this. I could talk about this for days, right? So no problem, anytime.
We'll have to ask you after the book comes out to we'll do a reading like they did. They used to do Paradise Lost, and we used to do a full reading overnight of Milton's Paradise Lost. We'll have to pull a chapter out or two, and then and also with I know you've done a few filmings of your TV show, so would love to follow up with that as well.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks, John.
Suzanne Selvester, coming to us from the UK. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. We appreciate your taking the time to visit with us on Crossing Faiths. Our podcast is available here on YouTube. It's also available anywhere you listen to your podcasts. And details, more about John and myself, and also more about Suzanne, are available at crossingphase.com.